Hey y'all, welcome back. Today I'm talking about fast fashion and a few various reasons why you shouldn't put your money into it if you don't have to. Yeah. So every year, the world as a whole consumes about 80 billion pieces of clothing. That's billion with a B. The amount of new clothing items that Americans consume per year has tripled since the 1960s. People are consuming more, and we want it for cheaper, and then the businesses who sell it for really cheap want to make more money, so they have to create things as fast as possible. This creates fast fashion. So you have your Forever 21s, your H&Ms, your Zara's, your Uniqlo's, your Target, your Walmart, and loads of other stores that are a part of this complicated web. These items are pretty cheaply made, and like I mentioned in my Is Thrifting Ethical video, they quickly come in and out of style. So today I want to lay out some environmental reasons, anti-racist reasons, and feminist reasons why you should stop putting your money into this industry if you can. First up, environmental reasons. So we used to make clothes out of much more natural fibers like cotton, linen, all that, but now about 60% of our clothes are made of synthetic materials, which come from fossil fuels, which I talked about a bit in my environmental racism in the plastic industry video, which I'll link. Over here. Is it over here? It's over here and down below. And since these fabrics are made of these fossil fuels, that means that when they end up in landfill, which I think about 85% of our clothes end up going in the landfill, they don't break down. It also means that any microplastics that come off your clothes, which happens a lot in the wash, end up in our oceans, and those don't break down either. Fast fashion not only contributes to resource pollution, but it also contributes to a lot of textile waste pollution. Let me make sure I have this number right. More than 15 million tons of used textile waste is generated each year in the United States, and the amount has doubled over the last 20 years. Textile waste has increased by 811% since the year 1960. And like I said earlier, the vast majority of it ends up in landfill. When clothing ends up in landfill, the chemicals in clothes, like dyes, can cause environmental pollution because they leach as they sit there over the years. And if clothes don't end up in landfill, they usually end up in the incinerator, where CO2 is released into the atmosphere. A recent study found that 1.2 billion tons of CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere every year from the fast fashion industry. Next up is some anti-racist reasons you should not contribute to fast fashion. So again, like I mentioned in my plastic video, which you can go check out, all these factories that create the textiles are placed near low-income communities of color where the residents face a lot of environmental hazards. Additionally, a lot of garment workers, who are primarily women of color, and we'll talk more about them in a second, they are exposed to toxic fumes and fabric dust, which can cause a lot of respiratory issues. During the dyeing process of making clothes, all the runoff from the chemical dyes ends up in the water sources that a lot of these communities of color depend on for survival. In China, 70% of the rivers and lakes have been contaminated by 2.5 billion gallons of wastewater from the textile and fashion industry. The water in these rivers have become a huge health crisis, with high rates of cancer and gastric and skin issues afflicting the folks who live nearby. So moving to the other end of the life cycle of a fast fashion item, a lot of these items end up in thrift stores. I've done it. You've done it. You take your stuff to thrift stores a lot, which seems like a great idea, except for the fact that most of those items will in fact end up in landfill because they're not going to get sold. Items that do not sell in thrift stores will often get sold overseas to Black and brown countries. The US itself exports over 1 billion pounds of used clothes overseas, and a lot of those wind up in secondhand clothing stores in sub-Saharan Africa. So that means they have to deal with our waste. A lot of these will end up in their own landfills, or because they're so cheap, a lot of the times that's all people want to buy, so the local fashion industries in these countries are just decimated by our secondhand clothes. The problem has gotten so bad that Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda have all banned the US from us giving them our used clothes. As we know, throughout history, Black and brown labor has been devalued and exploited. And there are so many ways that the fast fashion industry has benefited from systemic racism. Post 1960, about 98% of our clothing has been outsourced to offshore manufacturing sites in places like Bangladesh, India, and China, where wages are really low and labor laws are not strictly reinforced. Fast fashion companies can continue then to get away with legally not paying their workers enough and not giving them proper and safe working conditions. Between 2006 and 2012, at least 500 people were killed in Bangladesh from unsafe working conditions, and then in 2013 there was a factory collapse and that killed another 1,000 people. Fast fashion companies have also devalued the work of people of color by stealing their designs. For example, last year, an independent designer named Lucy Wilden found out that Fashion Nova had stolen a design of hers of a crochet dress. And this is not a one-time incident. Even just this year, I've seen people rip off mask designs from people of color. Like, how? Come up with your own ideas, man! Sorry. There's also a huge lack of BIPOC representation in marketing rooms, which is why we've had a lot of blatantly racist ads. And we also see underrepresentation in our runway models and their boardrooms when it comes to fast fashion companies. There are also some feminist reasons not to continue to give your money to the fast fashion industry. Currently, 75 million people around the world make our clothes, and 80% of those are women ages 18 to 24. I read that it takes about 18 months for a garment worker to make what the CEO of a fast fashion company makes on their lunch break. 18 months lunch break. And a majority of these workers earn less than $3 a day, which really sucks because these women, a lot of them have families and spouses, and they are the ones who are relied on to earn the money for the family, which is hard to do when they're making less than $100 a month. The women in these factories are working 14-hour days in poorly ventilated rooms, and so they are experiencing health problems, they are passing out at work, and there's always the threat of death when there are so many factory fires and just factories that have been poorly constructed that are collapsing. And I know it is not accessible for everyone to stop consuming fast fashion. But if you can purchase from more sustainable companies, if you have the money to do so, I recommend it. Or if you need to thrift for clothing, you can buy fast fashion secondhand and you haven't put any money into that market, but you can still get the cheap clothing that is also trendy. I know that's a thing that people appreciate. Or honestly, just mend and keep wearing and re-wearing the clothing that you do have, if possible. I just want to bring a little bit more light to the environmental and human issues that are pretty intertwined with the fast fashion industry, and even small changes you can make are always a great step forward. So thank you so much for watching. I hope I didn't get too preachy. I'm sorry if I did. I get passionate. But I hope you have a great day, and if you learned anything from this video, give it a like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. They usually end up in the incinerator. What? This is really itchy right here. A lot of these thrift stores. What? The US Excel.